We have a very serious chance of making a deal. That doesn't guarantee anything. I'm not guaranteeing anything. I'm not going to come out here in a week or 2 weeks and have you all say, oh, you said. I didn't say anything. All I'm saying is we are in the throes of a real possibility of making a deal.
Donald Trump is aware of the economic impact of the war on ordinary Americans. There is also the human cost. It's been reported he wants an off-ramp where he can declare victory. His deadlines have proven to be elastic. The patience of the American public might not be. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, at the White House.
We have correspondents following the story in Tehran, Ramallah, Riyadh, Beirut, New York and Washington, D.C. But first, let's start with John Hendren. So, John, is it clear who the US thinks it's talking to, making progress with, even agreeing on some 15 points, I think Donald Trump said?
It is not clear who the U.S. has been talking to. Donald Trump didn't mention that person. You heard him there saying, I don't want him to get killed. So we know it's a male, but that's about it. However, Axios is reporting that based on an Israeli official, that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, two negotiators for the president, one, of course, being his son-in-law, have been talking to the Speaker of the Iranian parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who is tied in with the supreme leader and well connected in Iran. Although we're not sure that's even true or whether they're talking to other people. The Trump administration has been very responsive to markets. So that criticism that what he might be trying to do is to depress oil prices and to drive up the market, it wouldn't be the first time if he did that. There have been times when he's withdrawn on tariffs after the market had a very negative reaction to that. So the bottom line is we don't really know who they've been talking to. We don't know if that person is representative of the government. We know that Iran is saying that they're not in talks. But the result of this is a 5-day pause, and that may be strategic in order to prepare for some upcoming operation. But
contractors and engineers to come in and fix and redo everything in the Gulf, then it's not going to get fixed or redone.
Israeli officials are now encouraging Iran's citizens to rise up and overthrow their government. So far, there have been no signs of that happening. In fact, if anything, the attack on Iran has actually led to more nationalism within Iran. It turns out that countries don't like foreign powers coming in and meddling with their business. I mean, just think about yourself as an American. As much as you might hate the administration that's in charge, and I really do not like Donald Trump, as you can imagine, the idea that I would want a foreign country to come in, attack us, and meddle with our politics is ridiculous. But nonetheless, you have the Israelis trying to agitate and get Iranians to rise up. But according to a stunning report from the Washington Post, the Israelis secretly acknowledge that many of them, meaning Iranian civilians that they're agitating and encouraging to rise up, will be slaughtered for doing so. They know that. They acknowledge that. And they're calling for it anyway. In fact, Israel doesn't mind at all. So let's back up a little bit for context, okay? So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dishonestly claimed that the Iran war is being carried out for the liberation of the Iranian people. Now, you have to be the most naive person on the planet to actually believe him when he says that. Israel has no interest in liberating anybody. Israel has an interest in expanding its borders, and the only real challenge to that in the Middle East has been Iran, both because Iran would fight them in doing so, but more importantly, Iran does fund and arm proxy groups like Hezbollah, which at this current moment is trying to defend its borders against Israel as Israel tries to annex more land. So that's the reality of the situation. Toppling the Iranian regime would make it far easier for Israel to carry out the Greater Israel Project. Now, it isn't a surprise that you are starting to hear more and more Israeli officials talk about how the next target will be Turkey, because if and when Iran falls, if and when that regime is toppled, well, what's the next powerful country that might pose a challenge to Israel in that region? Turkey. So something to keep in mind if you're still gullible enough to believe that the Israelis are doing this because they care about the liberation of the Iranian people. So now, just after this war began with Iran, Benjamin Netanyahu wrote the following on X. Let's take a quick look at this. In the coming days, we will strike thousands of targets of the terrorist regime. We will create the conditions for the brave people of Iran to free themselves from the chains of tyranny. And for this reason, I address you once again. Oh, citizens of Iran, do not miss this opportunity. This is an opportunity that comes only once in every generation. Do not sit idle because your moment will arrive soon. So again, agitating. When the protests sprung up prior to this war, you have Israelis and, by the way, U.S. officials in American media bragging about how there's Mossad on the ground. You know, Mike Pompeo, for instance, former Secretary of State under Trump's first term, was bragging about Mossad on the ground. You had Israeli media bragging about how there's Mossad on the ground. So whenever you hear about there's 32,000 people who got slaughtered by the regime during these protests, the reason why I don't believe it is there's not a single source that reinforces that number. Like, you can't just pull numbers out of your ass and expect people with minds to believe it. Like, you want to see evidence of it. No names of those killed have been released. I mean, the elementary school that the United States struck in Manab, we saw aerial images of all the graves lined up for all those little bodies, 168 children slaughtered by the United States, okay? And we still don't know where we got that intel from. I think it's important to do an investigation into that. And it would be nice if the President of the United States acknowledged and apologized for what we did, because that is such a stain on our country's history. It really is. But nonetheless, I mean, I don't believe the number. And until I see some concrete evidence for the number of people who were killed, until I see a report that distinguishes between, the regime's security forces carrying out killings and the armed individuals tied to Mossad carrying out killings, I'm not going to believe these BS numbers that are just being pulled out of people's asses. I'm just going to be real about that. But anyway, Netanyahu doesn't even care about his own people. Look at what his own people are currently going through, because he's finally been able to fulfill a 40-year dream of his. Okay, a couple pensioners, 2 elderly people sitting on their balcony yesterday in Israel got killed by Iranian missiles. They would be alive today had we not carried out these attacks against Iran. Benjamin Netanyahu, much like Trump, only cares about himself. He's a loathsome scumbag. But unfortunately, he is not unique when it comes to Israeli leadership. It's one
Thank you for having me.
You are in an unusual position during this. You have spoken with the Iranians in your life. You have negotiated with them on nuclear issues. You were part of that, I guess they call it JCPOA, that agreement that Iran was in before. As you put yourself in the shoes of the people now, who do you think they're negotiating with? A guy? What a guy are they talking to?
So John, you're absolutely right. I was part of the team that President Obama sent for secret negotiations with the Iranians for several months, paving the way for the Iran nuclear deal. One of the guys I actually negotiated with is the guy you see on TV all the time now, their foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, one of the few Iranians that's still showing his face publicly. I actually have a good story about a guy versus the guy. During those negotiations, President Obama wanted the opportunity to speak to the then president of Iran, President Rouhani. And in our secret negotiations, I had a contact with one of the Iranian officials. And he gave me a cell phone to give to the Situation Room for President Obama to be connected with President Rouhani. So I hand over the cell phone, and I'm standing there in the Oval Office while the call's being connected, and I have a thought. Have I just connected the president to a Canadian shock jock or some random other person? Or is this actually the president of Iran? And I'm going back through my head, what's the chain of custody of this phone number? And in the end, the Iranians put out a statement saying, in fact, their president had spoken to our president. So it was all confirmed. And I was like, all good. But
What if it was like a girl at a bar who's like, sure, here's my number.
Can you imagine this amazing moment in the White House?
Right.
President of the United States speaking to the president of Iran for the first time since 1979, a possibility of a real diplomatic breakthrough.
Right.
And I'm standing there just sweating bullets like, oh my God, what have I done?
Yes.
Turned out okay. But look, you know, it to me is a damn shame, and you said this in your opening, that it's really hard to know who to credit with their account. The Iranians say there is no communication. The President of the United States says there is. You'd want to believe the President of the United States over hardline clerics in Iran. But the reality is probably there's some kind of messages getting passed without real conversations happening, at least now.
In the times that you had dealt with the Iranians for the JCPOA and then again dealing with them during the Biden administration, how close did we come to physical escalating into war, into bombing? 4 years of the Biden administration, we didn't get them back into the JCPOA. We didn't do any of those things. How untrustworthy a regime are they? Do sanctions work? Like, it doesn't seem like there are any good solutions.
Well, first, I would just say, you know, Reagan said to the Soviets, trust but verify.
Right.
I always said when it came to the Iranians, don't trust and verify. And you had to do that all the way through. And when we got the Iran nuclear deal in the Obama administration, it had deep verification built into it. Inspectors on the ground over every inch of Iran's nuclear infrastructure to make sure they were compliant.
Did they comply with that? Because the scuttlebutt from a couple of guys is that they didn't. And that's why, and we gave them billions of dollars that they used for Hamas and Hezbollah. Is that what happened in your mind?
They got sanctions relief as a result of the deal, but yes, John, they were complying with the deal. Even the Israeli
Even in Isfahan,
intelligence,
even in the nuclear facilities, you
were
guys
saying
had
they
people
were
there.
complying with the agreement. And then in 2018, President Trump pulled out of it, said, this is the worst deal in human history.
Mm-hmm.
If that's true, that is quite remarkable, because there's been a lot of deals in human history.
Well, he also
This is
said that
actually the
about
worst one.
trade with Canada.
Yeah,
so
right,
you have
exactly.
to temper it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he pulls out of the deal.
Right.
And you're right, in the 4 years of the Biden administration, we got close at various points. We negotiated to get back in, but we couldn't get back in part because the Iranians said, wait a second, we did a deal with Obama.
Right.
Trump pulled out of it. How do we know that if you come in, you're not going to pull out of it again? Then Trump comes back. And when Trump comes back, there is actually an opportunity to do a deal because he's the guy who pulled out. And just a few days before we started bombing Iran, the Iranians put a proposal on the table in Geneva that went a long way towards resolving the nuclear issue. And my understanding is that our side, our negotiators, simply didn't understand what they were being offered, and they ignored it and decided to go ahead and strike.
Our guys didn't understand. Was it in Farsi? What? I don't. What do you mean they didn't understand? Like they didn't understand the Iranians' negotiating code?
If you listen to the way that the Trump administration officials who were involved in this spoke about what the Iranians were proposing, there is a mismatch between that and what the mediators, the Omani mediators, said was actually on the table.
Right.
So I think
the Trump administration said that Iran was threatening them by suggesting that they had a lot of enriched uranium. And apparently the Omani said, no, they weren't threatening you. They were just telling you what they had.
Telling you what they had, and also saying we're prepared to downblend that uranium, which basically means render it so that it's no longer fit for purpose to be turned into a weapon.
No, you cut it with baking soda. I've been around. I know what you do with the enriched uranium.
So at the end of the day,
right.
and I thought the way you laid out your opening segment with the total obliteration was so powerful because you can strike Iran's nuclear program.
Right.
But at the end of the day, they still have a stockpile of enriched uranium. They still have centrifuges lying around various facilities we may not even know about.
Right.
And they still have scientists who know how to put all that together.
So this gets us to the interesting point about belligerent countries and about belligerent nations, and that is the difference between capability and ambition. And I think we're seeing that now with Netanyahu. By the way, when you were in office, how many times did you have to say to Netanyahu, like, don't follow that? Like, do they listen? You know, I was so struck. This is a tangent. He seems f***ing nuts. Like, it's the kind of thing. I remember when Russia bombed Ukraine, and you guys came out with very powerful statements. These are war crimes. You're against that. And then Netanyahu bombs Gaza and kills thousands and thousands of civilians, and the U.S. is like, hey, guys, be cool. Like, it's so weird to me that we don't take... Why is that?
Well, there's a couple things. I mean, first, historically, the U.S. has been harder on our enemies than we've been on our friends, and that's true across the board. But secondly, John, the devastation in Gaza, the killing of civilians, the harm, suffering, pain, was something we tried to get up every day to end the war, and we didn't end it fast enough. But when we left office, we did have a ceasefire in place, and that's what we handed off to them.
But we don't. There's no conditions we can say, like, you know, no bombing. Those are our bombs. We give them those weapons. We can't dictate, because I don't know the end game. Like right now, he's bombing Iran, but he's also still bombing in Gaza. And now he's decided to invade southern Lebanon or bomb that. Again, it gets to, you can degrade capability, but all you're doing is creating more ambition. And how is that a recipe for a lasting peace?
Well, we had someone on our podcast a couple weeks ago named Danny Centrenowitz, who is the Israeli Defense Forces intelligence lead for Iran, was that for 15 years. And what he basically said was, when it comes to Iran, what Israel would like to do under this particular government is just break Iran and cause chaos. Because as far as they're concerned, a broken Iran is less of a threat to Israel. Now, the United States of America cannot think about it that way. Because a broken Iran means a broken global economy because they continue to threaten the Straits of Hormuz. It means a potential refugee flow like we saw after the war in Syria into Europe. It means a lot else besides. So I do believe that when it comes to this war in Iran, there is a real divergence between Israel's ultimate aims and the United States' ultimate aims. And part of the challenge we've seen is that when we ask, what is the administration doing, they can't answer that question because they don't know why they're there in the first place. They haven't been able to give us an answer as to what this is all about.
Well, look, I don't go along the route of, because I know there's now all the theories like Israel is wagging the dog. I never bought that. I feel like they're a convenient scapegoat for the United States to continue our imperialistic adventures in that part of the world. And I want to ask you, because it really does, what strikes me as maybe, I don't want to say the fatal flaw in American foreign policy, and I want to ask you if you guys have wrestled with it, is the difference between, we talked about capability and ambition, but what about influence and control? I think America hasn't figured out the difference between to influence events and control. And our policies in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, have shown an inability to understand the repercussions of those actions, whereas China doesn't seem to fall into that trap. What do you think of that for us?
I basically agree with you. And when President Biden...
I did not see that coming.
When President Biden was elected, one of the charges he gave all of us was end America's longest war in Afghanistan. Right. And do not put the United States uniformed military men and women back into war in the Middle East or anywhere else if it can possibly be avoided. That was his charge. We did end the war in Afghanistan, and it was painful, and it was brutal, and it was tragic. But when we left office, America was not at war for the first time in 25 years. And one of the reasons that President Biden gave for why he wanted to do that is because China was extremely happy to see the United States tied down in war in the Middle East while they went around the world with their largesse trying to win influence, as you say. And I think we do need to turn the page on our foreign wars, move forward to compete where competition matters in infrastructure and technology and economic development. But I would also say that in that post 9/11 period, John, we did a lot of good things too. Every administration did. If you look at the question of global health or people coming out of poverty, or people gaining literacy all over the world.
Right,
those indicators are all up, and that is because, in no small part, because of the United States of America. So,
in no way, though, over these last, if you were to look back on these last, let's say, 25 years, the reputation of the United States is not, they'll come in and really help us take care of poverty. The reputation of the United States is they'll bomb the shit out of you from wherever. Maybe they'll stay for a little while. Maybe they won't. They'll tell you, like with the Kurds, we'll arm you and we'll support you, and then we'll f***ing abandon you. Or we'll tell, like, where is our credibility on the world stage given the just unbelievable chaos that we've unleashed? I think we're generally responsible for the right populist swing in Europe. Because if we hadn't have done Libya and we hadn't have done Iraq and all those different things, would they be flooded with refugees in those moments?
I think Libya certainly contributed to that. So did Syria.
Right.
Of course, the difference between Libya and Syria is in Libya, we did take military action. In Syria, we didn't.
Right.
And in both cases, you ended up
Well,
with
we
these
did,
massive-
though, in Syria. We just didn't talk. We were arming
You mean
Al-Nusra
providing
Front and all those other. They were being armed. I remember running into this was so it was so weird. I was in Amman, Jordan. We were doing a film, and it's all Emiratis in the hotel. It was the Hyatt that had been bombed previously, although they'd really patched that up when I was staying there. My room, you could barely tell. And it's Ramadan, and it's all Emiratis, and it's and there's this one table of like dudes who very clearly were like raised in Nebraska and had the crew cuts. So I go over to the table and I go, "Hey man, what are you doing here?" And the guy looks at me and he goes, "We're not here." And I was just like, and then I just got cold. But we do that. And we do interfere in all these places. Somewhat cavalier nature. And then when it blows back on us, we're like, well, I guess we're just gonna abandon that project. But it seems like we haven't changed the approach.
Well, what I find really interesting is that in his first term, President Trump said, basically, I don't want to get involved in these foreign
Not doing anything, yeah.
President Biden comes along, ends the war in Afghanistan. The United States is basically out of the business of directly U.S. forces in these countries fighting wars. President Trump runs in 2024 saying, I'm going to be the peace candidate. He's awarded the FIFA Peace Prize a few weeks ago.
Very prestigious.
Very prestigious. And then turns around and says, no, I'm getting right back into this game. And the question is why? And I think a lot of it is that the appetite for him has grown with the eating. He did the bombing of the nuclear facility last year, total obliteration, as he put it.
Yes.
He does Maduro. He doesn't feel there are a lot of consequences, to your point about consequences in the back. He doesn't feel that, at least not immediately. There are those of us like you who were warning at the time, there's going to be a bill to be paid for this guy. He didn't see that. So then he thinks, I can go to war against Iran on a basis that could be up to and including regime change, and the Iranians aren't going to do anything in response. Therefore, I don't even need to prepare to protect the Strait of Hormuz. And that, I think, has been the fundamental flaw here, a belief that despite all the evidence we have from Iraq and Afghanistan, that when we get into these kinds of Middle Eastern wars, they do not work out well for us, and we need to turn the page on them.
Forget about Middle Eastern wars, South American wars, Central American wars. We are a regime change machine all over the world, and we're so overly extended. When you were there, does each president have, is there like a little, like Iran, like there's a library, and I'm assuming it's done alphabetically, but so Iran, and then obviously Iraq, probably thicker book, but they sit next to each other, and doesn't it say, when you pull it out, the work of 30 years of analysts, here's what's going to happen here, here's what's going to happen here. Don't they game this stuff out ad infinitum?
Ad infinitum.
So and he knows that. The president must know that.
Well, what was interesting is there were a number of newspaper stories in the days leading up to this war, because we could see it coming from weeks away as we built up for it.
Right.
Where it was military officials, including the most senior military officials in the Pentagon, basically being quoted on background saying, we have misgivings about this because of the potential response. But President Trump did not listen to it. And my supposition for why is because he was on a high from the 12-day war last year and the Maduro raid, and he basically thought, I can do Iran's weak. I can do this. They're not going to respond. They didn't respond last year. They're not going to respond this year. And it wouldn't just be the military, but the intelligence community would have told him, you start waiving the possibility of regime change in Iran, these guys are going to rightly consider that existential, and they're going to do whatever they can to respond. I said earlier that the United States doesn't know why it's in this war. And I really believe that because they've given 9 different explanations. Iran knows why it's doing what it's doing. It's trying to raise the cost on Donald Trump so that he ultimately stops bombing.
Well, you see immediately, as soon as gas prices go up to $3.79, he's like, we're done. We fixed it. Everything is good again.
So they have a coherent and clear strategy that they are pursuing here. And at the moment, we have the opposite.
You really think he cracked the code and now he's invincible? I swear to God, I knew people, cocaine did this to them. This is the same. This is how a cocaine person acts. A cocaine person is just like, I'm the best. No, I can't be stopped. That's what we have.
I couldn't put it better. Yes.
Well, thank you. Well, your podcast, they go over all this stuff. You got to check out his podcast, The Long Game, with Jake Sullivan and John Feiner. Jake Sullivan, thank you for joining us.
As the U.S. and Israeli war extends into its 19th day, we turn now to look at how the U.S. is using artificial intelligence to identify and prioritize targets. The system, known as Project Maven, was created by Palantir, and it incorporates the AI model Claude built by Anthropic. The Pentagon's investigating if the AI system played a role in the U.S. strike on the Iranian girls' school that killed over 170 people, mostly girls. This is CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper talking about the use of AI in Iran.
Our warfighters are leveraging a variety of advanced AI tools. These systems help us sift through vast amounts of data in seconds, so our leaders can cut through the noise and make smarter decisions faster than the enemy can react. Humans will always make final decisions on what to shoot and what not to shoot, and when to shoot, but advanced AI tools can turn processes that used to take hours and sometimes even days into seconds.
Israel's used similar AI targeting programs in Iran as well as in Gaza and Lebanon. The Pentagon also reportedly used the AI tools during the recent military attack on Venezuela, when U.S. Special Forces abducted the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife, Celia Flores. This comes as a major rift has emerged between Anthropic and the Pentagon after Anthropic moved to restrict the use of its technology for mass surveillance of Americans and for fully autonomous weapons. In late February, President Trump ordered federal agencies to stop using Anthropic products. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declared the firm a supply chain risk, effectively cutting it off from government contracts and related work. It marked the first time the Pentagon's designated a U.S. company as a supply chain risk, prompting Anthropic to sue. On Tuesday, CNN reported that nearly 150 retired federal and state judges have filed an amicus brief supporting Anthropic in its lawsuit against the Trump administration. We're joined now by Craig Jones, senior lecturer in political geography at Newcastle University, author of The War Lawyers, the United States, Israel, and Juridical Warfare. He's the co-author of a new article in The Conversation headlined, Iran War Shows How AI Speeds Up Military Kill Chains. Why don't we start there, Professor Jones?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the US military, the Israeli military, as your headline said, using AI. The kill chain is a bureaucratic mechanism whereby militaries go from trying to designate targets, to identify enemies and military targets, to the process of actually killing them. They're in the process across the 20th century, early 21st century, of speeding that process up. Military drones have helped greatly with that. And the latest front of that is AI. As Bradley Cooper talked about, you're reducing a massive human workload of tens of thousands of hours into seconds and minutes. You're reducing workflows and you're automating human-made targeting decisions in ways in which I think open up all kinds of problematic legal, ethical, and political questions.
The U.S.-Israel war in Iran is being described as the first AI war. Explain what that means, Greg.
Yeah, I would say it's not quite the first AI war. As you mentioned, Israel has used AI in Gaza. I think this was the first major use of AI in warfare. I think actually the history goes back a little longer with computer programs with partially enabled with AI have been used in the background of military systems for several years now. It was used in a major way in Gaza in the first few months, where we saw tens of thousands of targets put in a target bank opted by military intelligence. Up to 35,000 suspected Hamas combatants found themselves on this list as Israel worked through that to assassinate them. As well as tens of thousands of targets that are ultimately part of the civilian infrastructure. As you said, the US has used it with Maduro, and now Israel and the US also using these systems in Iran. The key innovation here is twofold. It is the use of AI for intelligence analysis. Military intelligence is multi-format. There is so much of it that hoovers up what they call signals intelligence, so mobile phones, internet traffic, SMS, mobile phone tracking, all kinds of things. And the AI systems are being used to spot what militaries call patterns of life. You know, who meets with who talks with who, what are the nature of the messages, how are they interacting in ways which are deemed suspicious. And the AI systems look for those patterns and make recommendations, which is the second innovation, for targets. They nominate targets to this bank of targets, which then has, which we can talk about, some technical human oversight. And that's problematic, I think. It's problematic because that's a really persuasive technology. It's nominating hundreds, thousands of targets, potentially a day, and it's working at speeds which are just beyond, the evolution of human cognition in, again, ways that are problematic.
Can you explain, this is being investigated by everyone, including the U.S. government and the Pentagon, how Palantir was used, it's believed, in the first strikes, the first day of the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, may have been involved in the targeting of a girls' school in southern Iran, using the tools of Palantir and Claude, which is a property of Anthropic.
Yeah, so this strike on the girls' school is, at the moment, the leading kind of civilian casualty incident in which around, as you've said, 170, mainly girls, were killed, innocent civilians. At the start, we should remember that some of the history of this. It was denied by the U.S. military. Trump insinuated at one point that it was an Iranian missile. It was later verified that it was indeed a U.S. series of Tomahawk missiles that struck this area. And a U.S. preliminary investigation has now found and confirmed indeed what many people thought, which was that the U.S. is responsible. We're not yet clear the role of AI in that particular strike. Whether that becomes clear in the coming days and weeks, we'll have to see. What we do know is that the Claude and Anthropic model by Palantir have been extensively used to do several things, including the intelligence analysis. So we can deduce that AI system is not yet capable of detecting or is at least, open to making system-wide errors. It did not identify the school as a school in an extremely problematic way, in which, within a couple of days, organizations such as the New York Times are able to verify via satellite imagery that there is a wall that's been put up around 13 years ago between the school and an IRGC compound that was nearby. If you'd have been watching drone footage from above, as militaries have the capability of do, just for half an hour before or a few hours before, you would have seen that morning 170 girls dropped off by their parents, and that would have been identified as a non-military target with clearly civilian usage.
But let's drill down into this, because yes, there was this military facility right next to it, as you described years ago. a wall was built between the two. So you've got the school very clearly identified. But how does AI work where you have this old, 10-year-old perhaps, information about it being a military base that's fed in, and then it is never updated? Where do human beings come into this?
Yeah, this is a really important question where it gets tricky, but we know a lot already. So it looks like it's just an intelligence failure, that an area marked on a map, this is, the whole entire area has been marked as a military compound. There is obligations, legal obligations and ethical obligations and just political obligations within defense intelligence agencies to check this. So what happens is some of these targets are nominated from US military bases back in the United States. Some of those people I've worked with over the last several years on what they call target nomination, what it looks like. They hand that over to CENTCOM, who I know you cover, and they have bases in the Middle East. There's a central one based in Qatar where these targeting decisions are executed. There is an obligation for CENTCOM to check and double check that intelligence, that it's up to date, that everything's kosher on the target. It's clear that was not done. Whether that was, there should be a human oversight of that, even if it's AI, recommended, or even if it's human recommended, there should be some human intelligence checking. It looks like, for whatever reason, and we don't yet know why. So what happens also is a really interesting technicality, is everything in a society that the US military is targeting de facto is labeled on a no strike list, because everything is assumed to be civilian. And in order to strike it, you need to get it off the no strike list to be able to target it. So the question here is, why was this school taken off a no strike list? It's deemed a legitimate military target. It looks like a combination of AI and human intelligence failure to produce something truly.
Talk about how Palantir interacts with Claude, which is owned by Anthropic, especially for the Luddites who are listening all over, for people who don't quite understand how this all works.
So yeah, from what we know, Palantir is a system, much like a deep software system that, like a video game that has all kinds of inputs that you can look at targets. You have all kinds of variables like, what size missile should we drop? What is the compound that we're looking at? What's it made out of? All these variables with intelligence overlays. And then, in the same way that software works on a computer, is the Claude is that thing which is in the background, which is kind of doing the processing of that data, making those recommendations, and then it provides the human some parameters that the human or operator or targeteer can then kind of play with. Obviously, it's highly sensitive and secretive, and beyond the very few people using it, the designers, even with Anthropic, would be a very small amount of people who have the intelligence clearance and who've seen this stuff working with sensitive military data. We know from some of the things they've released, like the demos that they've released, we can see some of what that looks like. And one of the most worrying developments that I've seen from what's publicly available is the lack of attention and ability to track civilian casualties within those programs. That's something which we've seen, this war on lawyers and war on civilian casualty harm, that the administration's built for several years in the US Department of Defense has been eroded by the Trump administration. And you actually see that now programmed into the software.
This is Palantir CEO Alex Karp, interviewed on CNBC last week.
These technologies are dangerous societally. The only justification you could possibly have would be that if we don't do it, our adversaries will do it, and we will be subject to their rule of law. So if you decouple this from the support of the military, you're going to have an enormous problem explaining to the American people, why is it that we're absorbing the risk of disrupting the very fabric of our society, including the most powerful parts of our society, if it's not because it's about maintaining our ability to be American in the near term and long term.
Craig Jones, if you can respond to the CEO of Palantir.
Palantir has a long history of making serious tens of millions, billions of profit from what ultimately I see as killing people in faraway lands that are too easy not to care about. I think this latest endeavor, as we've kind of started this AI arms race, it's been good to see at least Anthropic, throw their hands up and say we want some ethical parameters put on that. But even that, which seems to be, and meanwhile, as that whole controversy has been playing out, as you covered with the Trump administration, we see Sam Altman from OpenAI rush in and take the contract that Anthropic has ultimately dropped. Huge profits. They're a huge, the DoD is Department of War is a huge customer for many Silicon Valley firms. We've seen Microsoft use their platforms for the Israeli targeting. Apparently Microsoft are looking into that. We've seen Google AI Analytics also used for Palantir and for US DoD contracts. This is huge money, and I think, should the Silicon Valley community wake up to ultimately the consequences of the technologies which they're working on and see their effects on the ground, which is where I work with the people who've lost entire families, who've had their homes destroyed, who've been displaced, who have, had their legs blown off. There's this real disconnect between those tens of billions being made for profits of war and those people who suffer its consequences.
This is OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, who you mentioned, speaking at the India AI Impact Summit in New Delhi in February.
We don't yet know how to think about some superintelligence being aligned with dictators and totalitarian countries. We don't know how to think about countries using AI to fight new kinds of war with each other. We don't know how to think about when and whether countries are going to have to think about new forms of social contracts. But we think it's important to have more understanding and society-wide debate before we're all surprised.
So that's Sam Altman of OpenAI. And just quoting the Pentagon secretary, Trump calls him the war secretary, the defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, at a briefing in the last days. Unlike so many of our traditional allies who wring their hands and clutch their pearls, hemming and hawing about the use of force, America, regardless of what international institutions say, is unleashing the most lethal and precise air power campaign in history. B-2s, fighters, drones, missiles, and, of course, classified effects, all on our terms with maximum authorities. No stupid rules of engagement, no nation-building quagmire, no democracy-building exercise, no politically correct wars. Craig Jones.
Those are two jarring statements. Sam Altman's, ideas, I think in some, in what he said, he's right. We don't know about this. We don't know about that, what the future holds. My view would be that because we don't know of the potential dangers, risks, and damages that these technologies brings, we should pause as societies, as companies, as nations, as leaders, to have a serious conversation about what kind of AI future we want, whether this is a world that we want to build. Meanwhile, Hesketh, the Department of War, in January released a statement, a whole program actually, called the AI Warfighter Strategy, which some of the quote that you've just read comes from. And it talks about maximum lethality, as you say, out with the rules of engagement. This is a deliberate sidelining of the checks and balances, accountabilities for war, the firing of military lawyers, who are the community that I've worked with, who give legal advice to militaries, and just going ahead with it and Hesketh saying explicitly, just because we don't know how these technologies work, we need this first mover advantage. And it's that classic move fast and break things. And, we don't care about the consequences. These are really worrying times and developments.
You've referred to the war lawyer several times. That's the title of your book. Explain what you mean and how they've been fired and sidelined.
So these military lawyers have been, fighting alongside militaries for centuries. In fact, the U.S. Corps is the oldest law firm in America. And they do all kinds of things. But the thing that I've been interested in is they're giving advice to military commanders and decision makers for operations. So anytime a single target is struck in the last couple of decades, you would have a military lawyer present looking at things, doing what's called a proportionality calculation. So, okay, here's the military target. What's the risk of civilians? Should we go ahead? Should we pause? Are there certain measures we can take to avoid civilian casualties? And a host of other considerations. One would be the girls' school. Is this a legitimate target, or is this indeed a girls' school? So that's military necessity. And, they've had a long history. And, I worked with them. These are professional, serious people, educated at the best law school throughout America. They're also soldiers. Israel has its own version of them. And they've done credible work with militaries. And the Trump administration, one of the first acts that he does after he's sworn in his second term is to fire the heads of those legal units. So, the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, each have their own heads. He fired them. And then further down the ranks, he fired and replaced them with yes men. And beyond the firing and replacing, we are hearing from reporting and from some of my own contacts that the military lawyers are either just not being listened to when they raise objections, or they're becoming silent in these war rooms where these decisions are made. Because much like in the Trump administration, where his civilian and his advisors are around him, unless you say yes and go along with it, you're simply not welcome there, and you'll either be fired or not listened to. And so again, seriously worrying, especially when you put that alongside this simultaneous war on all these civilian casualty initiatives. So there was something called the Center of Excellence, which was to do with civilian protection. It's been a decade in the making. Lots of senior people in the US administrations, from Obama to Biden through Trump term 1, have been involved in that. And Trump, presses Control-Alt-Delete on day one and gets rid of the civilian center because they're not interested in avoiding civilian casualties, which feels like we're hearkening back to Vietnam or something.
Finally, Craig Jones, we just have a minute, but if you can explain this rift between Anthropic and the Pentagon, Anthropic saying its company could not be used for mass surveillance of Americans and for fully autonomous weapons, and then the Trump administration retaliating after they sued, President Trump ordering federal agencies to stop using Anthropic products, Pete Hegseth declaring the firm a supply chain risk. But then we hear that Claude, owned by Anthropic, is possibly used by Palantir in targeting this girls' school that killed well over 100 girls.
Yeah, there's lots to say here. One is that that seems like a disproportionate act when a company just exercises its right to disagree with what the government is doing. And I think the CEO at the time said disagreeing with the government is American as American pie. But the other thing is that this is infrastructure. I think some people think, AI is just a tool, it's something on your desk or it's something in the background, you just press delete. It's infrastructure that's embedded in the entire, intelligence apparatus. And so therefore you can't just delete it. So hence why it's still used, hence why it might take up to 6 months to try and get some of Claude products out of the software. The other thing is, it was good to see that ethical objection. It seems like the only, moral stance which has been taken on these conversations in the AI war is certainly in Silicon Valley. I would just object to their objection on 2 principles. They're against mass surveillance of US citizens only. They say nothing about citizens around the world. And partly their objection to its use for lethality is a technical rather than moral objection. It's to say, right now the algorithms are not quite good enough because they have this error rate, but they're not necessarily saying that they wouldn't go along with its use later on. So it's not that they're against lethality and killing per se, but that just technically the algorithms are not quite ready, and so they wanted to press pause. So there's lots to say about that, but it is a disproportionate act and response by the Trump administration, I think.
Craig Jones, I want to thank you for being with us, Senior Lecturer in Political Geography at Newcastle University, joining us from the UK, the author of The War Lawyers, United States, Israel, and Juridical Warfare, expert on modern warfare and aerial targeting, currently leading a research project on civilian casualties and war-related injury in Gaza and Iraq. We'll link to your piece in the conversation. Iran war shows how AI speeds up military kill chains. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.
Israeli officials are now encouraging Iran's citizens to rise up and overthrow their government. So far, there have been no signs of that happening. In fact, if anything, the attack on Iran has actually led to more nationalism within Iran. It turns out that countries don't like foreign powers coming in and meddling with their business. I mean, just think about yourself as an American. As much as you might hate the administration that's in charge, and I really do not like Donald Trump, as you can imagine, the idea that I would want a foreign country to come in, attack us, and meddle with our politics is ridiculous. But nonetheless, you have the Israelis trying to agitate and get Iranians to rise up. But according to a stunning report from the Washington Post, the Israelis secretly acknowledge that many of them, meaning Iranian civilians that they're agitating and encouraging to rise up, will be slaughtered for doing so. They know that. They acknowledge that. And they're calling for it anyway. In fact, Israel doesn't mind at all. So let's back up a little bit for context, okay? So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dishonestly claimed that the Iran war is being carried out for the liberation of the Iranian people. Now, you have to be the most naive person on the planet to actually believe him when he says that. Israel has no interest in liberating anybody. Israel has an interest in expanding its borders, and the only real challenge to that in the Middle East has been Iran, both because Iran would fight them in doing so, but more importantly, Iran does fund and arm proxy groups like Hezbollah, which at this current moment is trying to defend its borders against Israel as Israel tries to annex more land. So that's the reality of the situation. Toppling the Iranian regime would make it far easier for Israel to carry out the Greater Israel Project. Now, it isn't a surprise that you are starting to hear more and more Israeli officials talk about how the next target will be Turkey, because if and when Iran falls, if and when that regime is toppled, well, what's the next powerful country that might pose a challenge to Israel in that region? Turkey. So something to keep in mind if you're still gullible enough to believe that the Israelis are doing this because they care about the liberation of the Iranian people. So now, just after this war began with Iran, Benjamin Netanyahu wrote the following on X. Let's take a quick look at this. In the coming days, we will strike thousands of targets of the terrorist regime. We will create the conditions for the brave people of Iran to free themselves from the chains of tyranny. And for this reason, I address you once again. Oh, citizens of Iran, do not miss this opportunity. This is an opportunity that comes only once in every generation. Do not sit idle because your moment will arrive soon. So again, agitating. When the protests sprung up prior to this war, you have Israelis and, by the way, U.S. officials in American media bragging about how there's Mossad on the ground. You know, Mike Pompeo, for instance, former Secretary of State under Trump's first term, was bragging about Mossad on the ground. You had Israeli media bragging about how there's Mossad on the ground. So whenever you hear about there's 32,000 people who got slaughtered by the regime during these protests, the reason why I don't believe it is, A, there's not a single source that, reinforces that number. Like, you can't just pull numbers out of your ass and expect people with minds to believe it. Like, you want to see evidence of it. No names of those killed have been released. I mean, the elementary school that the United States struck in Manab, we saw aerial images of all the graves lined up for all those little bodies, 168 children slaughtered by the United States, okay? And we still don't know where we got that intel from. I think it's important to do an investigation into that. And it would be nice if the President of the United States acknowledged and apologized for what we did, because that is such a stain on our country's history. It really is. But nonetheless, I mean, I don't believe the number. And until I see some concrete evidence for the number of people who were killed, until I see a report that distinguishes between, the regime's security forces carrying out killings and the armed individuals tied to Mossad carrying out killings, I'm not going to believe these like BS numbers that are just being pulled out of people's asses. I'm just going to be real about that. But anyway, Netanyahu doesn't even care about his own people. Look at what his own people are currently going through because he's finally been able to fulfill a 40-year dream of his. Okay, a couple pensioners, 2 elderly people sitting on their balcony yesterday in Israel got killed by Iranian missiles. They would be alive today had we not carried out these attacks against Iran. Benjamin Netanyahu, much like Trump, only cares about himself. He's a loathsome scumbag. But unfortunately, he is not unique when it comes to Israeli leadership. It's one scumbag after another. They're horrible people. But anyway, I continue. So he continues, the moment when you must take to the streets, come to the streets in your millions to finish the job, to overthrow the regime of terror that has embittered your lives. Yeah, the only regime of terror is your regime, Netanyahu. Anyway, I continue. In recent days, Netanyahu has claimed that he wants Iranians to freely and safely celebrate the festival of Nowruz. I'm sure he cares a lot about these types of holidays, I'm sure. Take a look.
I take this opportunity to wish you a happy Nowruz, a year of freedom, a new beginning of hope to all of you, my dear friends. Nowruz Piruz, Payonde Iran. In the past 24 hours, we knocked out 2 of the terrorist chieftains, the top terrorist chieftains of this tyranny. Our aircraft are hitting the terror operatives on the ground, in the crossroads, in the city squares. This is meant to enable the brave people of Iran to celebrate the Festival of Fire. So celebrate and Happy Nowruz. We're watching from above.
And Trump, just like a good dog for Israel would do, regurgitates the same type of messaging. So, for instance, after Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed, Trump wrote the following on social media: "This is not only justice for the people of Iran, but for all great Americans. This is the single greatest chance for the Iranian people to take back their country." But again, there has been absolutely no signs of an uprising. If anything, this has increased nationalism in Iran. And the hollow pro-freedom messaging from Trump and Netanyahu, it just gets regurgitated by media figures who just support war against Iran. So here's a Fox News panel discussion showing you just that.
And you have the people who are talking to Iranians in Iran saying, they're most afraid of the bombs stopping because if the bombs stop, they believe the United States might be done.
Absolutely. And when they have the moment to tweet, they're tweeting and saying, please don't stop. Because the worst thing that could happen to us is if you leave this regime in place, which means who is going to pay the price? We, the Iranian people, are. They're going to torture us more. They're going to kill us. They're going to throw us in prison. You've got to finish the job. They are celebrating every time a bomb goes on. Just imagine, Trace, for a moment that you'd be celebrating when you hear a bomb go off, because that is a freedom mission. It's a freedom mission for them. This is not a war. They are finally going to be free from their oppressors that have held them hostage for the past 47 years.
It is rich for a Restylane-filled face in the United States sitting in a cushy studio to allege that the Iranian people are desperate to be bombed, desperate to be terrorized by the West, desperate to have the United States come in and decide, based on the advice of the Israelis, who should lead Iran. It's rich. I mean, this woman, what would she know? She knows as much about the Iranian people in Iran as Reza Pahlavi does, which is to say nothing. Now, if you genuinely believe that the Iranian people deserve liberation, then that has to happen organically, not through us dropping bombs on their homes, on their hospitals, destroying energy infrastructure, killing little children. We are opening salvo, slaughtered 168 little girls at an elementary school in Manab. You think the Iranian people like that? These people are beyond evil, beyond evil. But anyway, on Piers Morgan Uncensored, myself and Cenk, by the way, have debated commentators who use very similar talking points. Goldie Gamari, who lives in Canada and was disbarred because she's unhinged, is one of the individuals spreading propaganda. Let's take a look at that.
I just want to say, thank you to the United States. Thank you to Israel for everything that they're doing. We Iranians were so grateful. And I can tell you that this has been one of the most amazing weekends, not just for me, but for Iranians in occupied Iran and around the world.
Okay. You live in Canada and you have no idea what's going on. Like the propaganda in like the Western world, speaking on behalf of a population of 92 million people who are being terrorized right now from the comfort of Canada is hilarious to me. But anyway, another talking head who claims to represent Iranians is, I kid you not, Danny Danon, the Israeli ambassador to the UN. Okay, so last week, Piers Morgan pressed him on his alleged love for the Iranians, and let's see how that went.
You say you love the Iranian people. The cold, hard reality on the ground is that more Iranian civilians have now been killed in the last 8-9 days of this war than Hamas killed on October the 7th, that's according to the official figures. That doesn't sit very easily with your love of Iranian civilians.
I beg to differ with you. I think the Iranian people, they cannot say it out loud, but when they look up in the sky and they see the Israeli aircraft and the U.S. Air Force, they are grateful. They have been waiting for those moments for 47 years. They were oppressed, and today we come to unchain them, to give them the tools to rise up. Yes, it's going to be painful. Also, it's painful for us in Israel.
And let me remind you that Israel wants to reinstall the Shah, right? They want a monarchist in power that they can easily manipulate and control, which is why Reza Pahlavi is their favorite to replace the IRGC. And what happened under the Shah? Were the Iranian people free? Were they liberated? Or were they living under a police state with Sabak? Okay, with secret police terrorizing them and monitoring their every move. Please. Now, all of that brings us to the Washington Post piece. I know that was a lot of context, but I think it's important to know what's going on and what the different players are alleging, okay? Because according to the Washington Post, the Post, I should say, uncovered a State Department cable that was circulated by the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem just last Friday. Now, what did that cable say? The cable relayed an Israeli assessment that Iran's regime is not cracking and is willing to fight to the end. If large numbers of Iranians return to the streets, Israeli officials say, the people will get slaughtered because the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's principal military force, has the upper hand.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.
The Israeli Defense Force, Israel's well-funded and high-tech army, is the most moral army in the world. That is, if you believe the branding.
צה"ל הוא הצבא המוסרי ביותר בעולם.
The most moral army in the world.
The IDF is a moral army.
The most moral.
The IDF does more to safeguard the rights of civilians than any other army in the history of warfare.
But apart from the allegations of war crimes in Gaza, the attempts to paint it as an animal-friendly, queer-friendly, religiously tolerant military institution, the history of the IDF says more about it than its social media image. Before the formation of the State of Israel in 1948, and before there was an Israeli army, there were three underground Zionist militias: the Haganah, the Irgun, and the Lehi. They were comprised of mainly Jewish migrants to the British Mandate of Palestine, with the aim of helping usher in the Jewish state by any means necessary. They differed in their tactics and beliefs, and at times fought with each other, but together they terrorized Palestinian villages, committed acts of violence, terrorism, and ethnic cleansing, and executed bombings and assassinations against the British to force them to give up control of the land. They blew up hotels in Jerusalem, embassies in Europe, and assassinated a UN mediator. All of this happened before 1948, because after Israel was officiated as a state, These three groups would be brought together to create the IDF, and their militia leaders would go on to form Israel's government, become politicians, ambassadors, and prime ministers. And their dark history would be forgotten. So, let's talk about it. Let's begin at the turn of the 20th century. Europe was embroiled in revolution, war, and great social upheaval. Anti-Semitism had been rife for centuries in Europe, but attacks against Jewish communities had become widespread, particularly in Russia. While most attempted to flee to the United States, around 30,000 Russian Jews migrated to Palestine from 1882 to 1904, then under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. These communities were known as the New Yishuv, and they built small self-reliant settlements independent of the Old Yishuv, who consisted mostly of Arab Jews who'd migrated to Jerusalem over centuries, mostly for religious practice. Unlike the Old Yishuv, the New Yishuv were driven by a new ideology that was growing popular among European Jews as well as some influential Christian figures: Zionism.
And the basis of Zionism was the belief that the Jewish question, as it was called in Europe, in other words, the place of Jews, given the rising anti-Semitism, could only be solved territorially, that is, by establishing a state of their own. And from very early on, that state had to be in Palestine, because that way you could use religious legitimacy to justify what was settler colonialism.
The New Yishuv were ambitious. They built farms, formed trade unions and councils to purchase land from Palestinians. They also began to form small militias, seeking to replace hired Arab watchmen with Jewish guards to protect the new outposts. Some of these militias, like Bar Giora, had bigger plans. Its members wanted to create the beginnings of an underground army, one that would one day serve a future Jewish state, and fight for one if need be. One of its founders was a young Polish laborer called David Grun, who migrated to Palestine in 1906. He was shocked at how many Palestinian Arabs worked in the new settler colonies as farmers and guards, and set about trying to build connections between migrants and fundraise to ensure the Yishuv would become completely self-reliant. This included more money to buy weapons. Like many other Jewish migrants, he later adopted a Hebrew last name and would hence be known as David Ben-Gurion. Welcome back to him. By 1909, militias like Bar Giora began to evolve into larger networks, the most prominent being Hashomer, or the Watchman. Despite only having a few dozen members, Hashomer began to think of itself as guarding not only the colonies and properties set up by the New Yishuv, but as a vigilante force that would respond to disputes. If a Jewish person was attacked by a Palestinian, Hashomer would send its armed members to seek revenge. They were inspired by Ukrainian Cossacks and, interestingly, Palestinian Bedouins. They rode on horseback and even dressed in kufiyyas. Weird, right? In his book Orientalism and the Hebrew Imagination, historian Yaron Peleg says the young Zionists wanted to recreate the image of the Jewish man and reject the anti-Semitic tropes of Jews as weak and passive. In the New Yishuv, they focused on farming and fighting as ways to build stronger, more self-reliant men, what Zionist leader Max Nordau described as muscular Judaism. And while they drew inspiration from the agricultural Arabs they saw around them, they no longer wanted to rely on Palestinian laborers and guards.
You are an 88-year-old survivor of the Holocaust from Hungary. Do you believe what's happening in Gaza is a genocide?
Don't talk with anyone who doubts it.
Your father was sent to a concentration camp.
My family lost 15 members to Auschwitz.
How did you come across the issue of Palestine?
As a result of my visit to Israel, to my horror, I found that every member of my family, they were all racist by then.
Towards Arabs?
Yes.
What is it like to be a Jewish Holocaust survivor who is accused, I'm sure you are, of being anti-Semitic?
In 1944, what I saw then was a byproduct of two armies fighting. And what I see in Gaza is deliberate destruction. It's even worse.
What would you say to someone like Benjamin Netanyahu who says, I'm fighting on behalf of all Jews? For more than 2 years now, supporters of Israel have insisted that calling what's happening in Gaza a genocide is a modern-day blood libel against Jewish people. To accuse Jews, the victims of the greatest genocide of all time, of perpetrating a genocide against others, well, that's offensive. That's anti-Semitic, they say. Well, is it? The consensus of genocide scholars is that it is a genocide. But who better to ask about the genocide in Gaza? Not a genocide scholar, but an actual Holocaust survivor. Joining me now is 88-year-old Stephen Kaposh. Stephen, thanks so much for coming on Zeteo.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
So you are an 88-year-old survivor of the Holocaust from Hungary, and you have been speaking out against what's happening in Gaza for over 2 years now here in the UK. You've become a very well-known activist at demonstrations, on the media.
Yeah.
Do you believe what's happening in Gaza is a genocide?
Absolutely. In fact, I think it is so obvious that I really don't talk with anyone who doubts it, because it's an absolute red line. It's so obvious.
You see people who deny the Gaza genocide akin to Holocaust deniers. You don't engage with them. They're deniers.
Yes, correct. We have a small group, the Holocaust Survivor and Descendants Against the Genocide in Gaza. It's a long title, but it does explain what's on.
It's an important name, I think.
Yes. And we, as you probably know, we stand by the side of the big marches, and we have extremely warm reception, invariably. People are sometimes quite moved by the fact.
That's strange. I was told all these marches are anti-Semitic.
Well, that's exactly what we are doing, denying by being there and give a lie to this claim, which is absurd. Both that these marches are no-go areas for Jews, or that these are hate marches. And we are sort of proof against it, if you like.
You're there not just as Jewish protesters against genocide, you're there as Holocaust survivors protesting against genocide, which is obviously a pretty unique and sad position to have to be in. Let's just, for the sake of our viewers who don't know about you, Stephen, you, I believe, were 7 years old when World War II reached your hometown of Budapest. You were forced to go into hiding. You were separated from your mother. Your father was sent to a concentration camp. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, about enduring the Holocaust. What happened to your parents? What happened to you?
Yes. In about October 1944, the Hungarian semi-fascist autocratic ruler, Admiral Horthy, made a declaration that Hungary was leaving the German alliance. He made that from his palace in the Buda Hills, and was pretty quickly arrested by the Germans as a result. The Germans came in March 44, invading their ally. On the face of it, Hungary was an ally of Germany. From the declaration date onwards, the out-and-out fascist party, the Arrow Cross Party, took power, and they were allied with or organized marauding groups, armed groups, which were actually hunting Jews. So suddenly, from that date onwards, the jeopardy was much greater for the Budapest Jews.
Do you remember that period yourself, personally?
Yes, I do remember, because it was on that day, on the day of declaration, that I was taken up into these protected homes, I mean, inverted commas protected. And we had to go past a German checkpoint. And the German field guns were trained on the palace.
Okay.
As we were going past. I was being carried, I was too small enough to be carried, and the person who was sent down from the homes to take me up had some magical pass, which he just flashed to the German crew checkpoint, the soldiers who manned it, and they just stood to attention and waved us on. I don't know what was in that pass, but I kind of fantasized that probably it carried Hitler's signature or something, because that was all. They had one side of it, and we were waved on. And so from that point on, I was in hiding.
But not with your parents?
Not with my parents. My mother was in charge of a group of girls, and my aunt was in charge of a group of boys that I was attached to. And we were all on false papers and were supposed to have been refugees from the advancing Soviet troops on the Eastern Front, and obviously Aryan. And so some of us were meant to be war orphans. Anyway, everybody on false papers and false names. And my aunt, who was in charge, we were not allowed to recognize the family ties, for example, as a security.
But you and your parents, you survived the Holocaust. Your parents survived the Holocaust also.
Yes.
Even though your father was sent to account, he was one of the lucky ones.
Yeah. Well, yes, he was part of the Kastner project. Okay. That's how I got to Belsen. And the idea was that those transports, who were organized by Kastner with a deal with the SS, were to be eventually allowed to go to Switzerland from Belsen. And the previous group did that, in fact. But the whole deal, where Himmler himself was involved, was behind Hitler's backs.
Okay.
And when he discovered it, he stopped the whole thing. And in fact, Himmler was very nearly arrested at that time.
So you say as a child you remember that period. It obviously influenced the way you grew up, influenced your entire worldview. I do wonder, how has your childhood influenced the way you view the genocide in Gaza today? Do you find that your own experience as a child enduring a genocide has made you identify more closely maybe with the children in Gaza? What do you make of what you've seen over the past 2 years?
Liking this video? Then don't just watch, hit like, share and subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to Zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism.
Well, yes. I mean, there has been othering and discrimination even before that critical date. For example, we all had, from a certain date on, we all had to wear the yellow star.
Yeah.
And I had to wear a yellow star, despite my young age. And I do remember that. Most of my experience at the time was rather mild, because I was too young to understand the implications and the dangers. It was in retrospect that I sort of realized how awful everything was and how dangerous everything was. And of course, knowing that my family lost 15 members to Auschwitz. And that was an impact on me more than what I actually personally experienced. That was just part of it, if you like.
So how did you come across the issue of Palestine? How long have you been involved in Palestine activity?
Well, I think
you're 88 years young right now.
Yeah.
How long have you been involved in the struggle for Palestinian liberation as a supporter?
Well, first, I became, without sort of putting necessarily an active label on it, anti-Zionist as a result of my visit to Israel to visit my family. Some members of my family, in circuitous ways through Romania, ended up.
What year was that you went to visit Israel?
That was before the 67 war.
Okay.
Quite early. And I was completely shocked at what I found there. And I think that was a critical influence on me. Because to my horror, I found that every member of my family, and a number of aunts and cousins, etc., they were all racist by then.
Towards Arabs?
Yes, as they called them, not Palestinians.
Indeed.
And that really both horrified me, and I couldn't understand how it could happen. I now understand more about the impact of drip propaganda, and also the kind of completely artificial fear that was created in them, that somehow they bought into the idea that unless they forcefully keep down the Arabs, they would be driven into the sea and the existential danger, which I am convinced was a complete lie.
Yes. You go there before the 67 war, before the occupation of West Bank and Gaza. Did you ever imagine at the time that one day you, Stephen Kaposh, former young child living through the Holocaust, would be at protests against Israel, saying the world's only Jewish state is now guilty of a genocide?
No, I wasn't aware of it at the time at all. In fact, around that time, I wasn't particularly active in any way in politics because having come after the 1956 uprising in Budapest, where I was actively involved in the demonstrations, and actually the uprising the day before really started at my university. But I have been through so many political upheavals and changes that when I got to the UK in '56, I decided to concentrate on my profession rather than...
So how do you rediscover Palestine and activism? Is it more recently, in the last 10, 15
Well,
years?
I think the critical experience was first the false anti-Semitism campaign inside the Labour Party.
Okay, so the Jeremy Corbyn period.
That's right. When I was horrified by the complete cynicism and I think deliberate lies that surrounded that campaign, using a false accusation of anti-Semitism against the left.
Yes.
And Jeremy Corbyn personally, but also his...
And which has now continued into a general attack on pro-Palestine activists as being anti-Semitic.
Yes. But that was the beginning of
Interesting.
Of my...
Were you a member of the Labour Party?
Yes.
Are you still a member of the Labour Party?
No. This links to how I became active in the Palestine thing, because I resigned from the Labour Party when, having been asked by a left socialist group, SLN, to address them about the Holocaust on Holocaust Memorial Day about 3 years ago. And I said, yes, of course, I will, because there are very few witnesses left.
Yes.
And yes, I will talk to. They put out my name as being on a panel advertising it. And I immediately got a letter from the regional office of the Labour Party saying that, putting me on notice that if I go ahead with that engagement, I would be, disciplinary investigations would start up against me. And I interpret that, knowing how those sort of things went in those days, as being thrown out.
Yes.
That there could be no other
So you quit?
I immediately resigned with a letter, and that letter went viral because I ended the letter saying that maybe these techniques of false accusation of anti-Semitism, etc., will work electorally in the short term. In the long term, it will be a matter of shame for the Labour Party.
Well said.
That it had to be the Labour Party who imported McCarthyism into this country.
Well said. I like the idea
that went pretty viral.
I like the idea that an 85-year-old knows how to go viral.
Yes.
That's impressive.
Well, I didn't know. It was just
No,
happened.
I'm sure you do. Let me ask you this. What is it like to be a Jewish Holocaust survivor who is accused, I'm sure you are, of being anti-Semitic? I'm sure there are other Jewish people in the UK who say you're a self-hating Jew. You know, Jews who oppose what Israel are doing are often demonized, smeared as self-hating. What is it like for you as someone who literally survived the Holocaust to be accused of that?
Well, I don't take any notice of it, to be honest. And the worst that I had was when I was speaking at a Camden meeting. While I was speaking, there was an anti-demonstration by Zionists, and somebody read in the Israeli flag perched above me was calling me capo repeatedly. Wow. I didn't hear it because I was speaking, but other colleagues immediately reported this to the police who were present, and this guy was arrested.
It's interesting you mentioned the police, because I believe the Met Police here in London brought you and 8 others in for questioning after you laid flowers at Trafalgar Square as part of a peaceful protest for Gaza. What did they bring you in for? What did they say you'd done wrong?
Well, this was a day when the police acted completely differently from normal. We kind of, I think it's fairly safely assumed, because of suggestions from above, from higher circles.
But what did they say to you that you'd done wrong?
The claim was the same as against Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, who were on either side of me in that particular demonstration. The claim was that we went against a police order for the day, which was to remain static instead of marching. The original idea was to march towards the BBC to protest against their distorted coverage. Yes, and the police banned this in the last minute and said, no, you can't march. You got to be static at Whitehall.
And they took in an 88-year-old Holocaust survivor. What do you make of all these police rounding up of hundreds of Palestine Action protesters, little old ladies, grandmothers, priests, people in wheelchairs, blind people, a Labour government sending the police to do this? Did you ever think you'd see that in your lifetime as a survivor of fascism?
No, that's absolutely amazing. It's an own goal, actually.
Yes.
And I am amazed at the capacity of the government to create own goals one after the other. They will never give up. It is going to be, there already was some 2,000 people in total have been so arrested, and it will continue, and it will, it's unmanageable.
It's very authoritarian.
Yes. Well, that's one of my themes, actually, that as a conclusion from what I witnessed and so on, that fascism develops in stages, and it doesn't drop out of the sky. And I think we are kind of dangerously on the way to various fascistic qualities, and we have to resist that.
Yes,
right
we do.
now.
On that note, when people say, for example, Donald Trump in the United States, what he is doing resembles what Germany looks like in the 1920s, 1930s. Is that a fair comparison?
Absolutely. And also, I am very active to repeatedly try and break the taboo against comparison with the Israeli actions with the Nazi actions.
So the IHRA definition is, of anti-Semitism.
That's a catastrophe.
Very controversial definition of anti-Semitism. It says comparing Israel's actions to the Nazis is a form of anti-Semitism. You reject that?
Absolutely. It's a taboo which must be broken as often as possible.
Do you think Israel's actions in Gaza are comparable to the Nazis?
Yes, I think so. In quality, not in quantity, because we are not yet in.
Thankfully,
and hope never will be in the millions.
Well, Israeli soldiers are on record telling the Israeli newspapers, "I felt like a Nazi in Gaza." One of them told an Israeli newspaper.
One of the comparisons I have is in 1944, the winter of 1944. We were not only in hiding from October to liberation, but also in double jeopardy, because it so happens that where the homes were was where the epicenter of the final fight between the German army and the Soviets was played out. And the front line moved through us. And we had to relocate several times in double jeopardy.
Okay.
Sometimes they were shot at because they couldn't distinguish between groups of dots in the snowfields or all that. And so when it was over and we finally came out of all that and looked around, because this is not typical, was the greatest area of destruction, because it was the final fight. Because Budapest generally wasn't so destroyed, just in pockets. But just there, it was absolutely horrendously the royal castle burnt out, piles of rubble and glass and burnt out tanks and dead horses and dead soldiers and abandoned ammunition. Look just like Gaza in certain shots.
So you're reminded
with the difference I keep pointing out, that what I saw then was a byproduct of two armies fighting. And what I see in Gaza is deliberate destruction. It's even worse.
Well, there are a lot of people who will hear you say that and be outraged. A lot of Jewish people will say it is anti-Semitic. They will say it's over the top. You obviously have the privilege. It's a horrible privilege, Dan. I shouldn't use the word privilege. You have the horrible right to speak on this as a Holocaust survivor. You can say certain things that other people can't say by virtue of the fact that you did survive the Holocaust. But let me ask you this. What do you make of the battles within the Jewish community over this issue? I know you sometimes go to protests with your daughter and your granddaughter. Do you see a generational change amongst British Jews when it comes to Israel and attitudes to Israel?
Yes, I think it's growing. And I protest against, and we all protest, you left-wing Jews, protest against the Board of Deputies and the JLM. And
these are British Jewish communal organizations.
Claiming that they speak for the Jewish community. There isn't a homogeneous Jewish community. There are Zionist groups, and there are completely different socialist left-wing Jews. And they, the Board of Deputies, don't speak for the whole community. It's a myth that there is a so-called Jewish community. There are several communities.
But you would accept you're a minority within the British Jewish community.
But I'm not so sure about that.
Interesting.
Actually. I'm sure others have done research. But in a circle where I move, the left-wing view is dominant. There are those Jews who say always with the oppressed, never with the oppressor. And there are many who subscribe to that.
What would you say to someone like Benjamin Netanyahu, who says, I'm fighting on behalf of all Jews?
It's a propaganda claim, it's false, completely false. I heard him speak in a snippet at Yad Vashem when he said, never again is now, with a reference to use again the Holocaust for a cover for a basis for the impunity that they seem to have or claim. And for us, never again has a completely different meaning. The left Jews. We think that the conclusion from never again is that this kind of horror of the Holocaust should not be ever visited with any other nation, faith, or group, ethnicity.
And it has been done to Gaza by Israel. Stephen Kaposh, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to zeteo.com. Your support matters.
The moment I said, yes, I'm willing to take the Pledge of Allegiance, they come inside and they detain me.
You made a speech in which you directly addressed the Trump administration. You said, I'm not afraid of you. Were you not worried that they would come after you even more?
I am carrying with me the Palestinian resilience.
Has anyone from the Colombian administration reached out to you, apologized, said they felt bad for what happened to you?
None. This is a war on everything that is Palestinian. If it's not authoritarianism, what else would it be?
Has anyone from the Colombian administration come back to you and said, watch what you say, now you're back on Colombia, be careful? When it comes to Trump's rogue deportation campaign, it appears that he's been able to get away with just about everything. That is, for the most part.
A judge delivered a major blow to one of Trump's many deportation schemes after blocking the deportation of Mohsen Madawi, a Columbia graduate student who was detained by ICE last year over his role in the campus's pro-Palestine protests. This comes just after a separate immigration judge blocked the deportation of Tufts University student Rumeysa Öztürk, who was detained by ICE also last year over an op-ed she wrote calling for her school to divest from Israel. But is this enough to stop the Trump administration from going after these pro-Palestine students? Joining me now to discuss it all is the Columbia graduate student himself, Mohsen Madawi. Thank you so much for coming on Maybe Let's Talk.
Pleasure being with you, Mahdi.
So, you have been through a lot. It's been covered a lot, but for our viewers who don't know, just explain briefly what happened to you last year on that day you went for what was, I believe, your citizenship interview.
Correct. I was sent a notice that I should appear or I have a citizenship interview, and that was shortly after some of the students were already detained. I expected that it's going to be a trap, and a trap it was. I concluded my citizenship interview and I was asked if I'm willing to actually sign the Pledge of Allegiance, and at that time the DHS have actually violated the Constitution that they were asking me if I'm willing to protect and to respect by detaining me, throwing me in prison for 16 days.
So in the middle of your, is it an interview or just they just walk in?
I concluded the interview.
Yeah.
And the moment I was asked by the end of the interview, which is, they call it the citizenship test.
Yeah.
The moment I said, yes, I'm willing to take the Pledge of Allegiance, they come inside and they detain me.
Why the spectacle? Why did you detain you since you arrived? Why go through all this motion?
I think that this is a question to ask the government of why. But my speculation that they wanted to see if I am going to be honest and transparent about my application. And I answered everything honestly. There's nothing to hide.
And what, just for our viewers, just remind them, what did they claim you did? What was the basis for them to do?
I mean, now we can tell that their claim is a bullshit.
Yep.
Because there is actually no claim. The Rubio memo that was signed.
But you're undermining the foreign policy of the
Exactly, and not only the foreign policy, it's like undermining the peace process in the Middle East for protesting a genocide and calling for boycott, divestment, and sanction from entities that furthering it.
You were held in ICE custody for 2 weeks. Over the past year, we of course have heard all sorts of stories about atrocious conditions in ICE facilities, including lack of access to healthcare, very poor sanitary conditions, constant surveillance. What was your experience of detention like?
I had a unique experience, and the reason is because I was the last student to be detained and the first to be freed, and I was kept in Vermont. So the Trump's administration, they wanted to transport me to Louisiana, something that they have failed because we missed the flight, a commercial flight, by 10 minutes.
It's accidental.
One might say.
Okay. So what was the actual condition like in Vermont? Better than elsewhere?
I mean,
you didn't make it to the Louisiana gulag.
Yeah, I hear the conditions that I read about and hear about are very horrible conditions. They don't even meet the human dignity of putting somebody in prison. And even though many people think that this prison system in Vermont is much better, actually there are many horrible things there.
Sure.
In terms of like providing attorneys to immigrants who are in detention, translators, the meals, they have very restricted like schedule of meals, 20 minutes, the sleeping conditions, it's inhumane, even though it's considered to be one of the best detention centers.
When you were first released from detention, you made a speech in which you directly addressed the Trump administration. You said, "I'm not afraid of you." Trump is a very petty, vindictive man. That's kind of red rag to a bull. Were you not worried that they would come after you even more?
Mahdi, you have to keep in mind that I'm carrying with me the Palestinian resilience. We've seen the darkest of what the humans could do. The darkest of the Israeli apartheid system, the terrorism of my people, the killing, I've seen it in my eyes. So yeah, they can come after me and they can try their best, but I am a person who's fighting for justice for my people, and I am a person who's fighting for peace for my people. So I had to say my truth.
Yeah. And you said let them try their best. They've tried, as I mentioned in the introduction, an immigration judge has now blocked the Trump administration from deporting you. How relieved were you to hear that news, especially when you see what's happening to people like Mahmoud Khalil and others who they're still going after, they're still trying to deport, obviously non-Palestinians like Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was famously deported to El Salvador, now back in the US, they're trying to get rid of him. How relieved were you to hear the news in your case?
There was I felt relief to a certain level. And we know that Trump's tactic, the Trump's administration tactic, they're trying to basically politicize the immigration system. For this judge to make it very clear that she would not, in fact, violate the rules of the law, according to the First Circuit, which is in Boston or in Massachusetts. It was very reassuring that there are people who are still holding their clarity, moral clarity and their dignity, and with courage, because she took a risk.
Yeah.
Judge Nina Frost.
Are the Trump administration going to appeal? They tend to appeal against it.
That's what the government's attorney said, that they plan to appeal. They have until March 13th, and we'll see what's going to happen after.
Liking this video? Then don't just watch, hit like, share and subscribe. And tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to Zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism. As I'm sure you're aware, a 33-year-old Leka Kurdi, a Palestinian woman who participated in several pro-Palestine protests, including one at Columbia. She's been sitting in ICE detention for almost a whole year now. A lot of people have kind of forgotten her name, not given her much coverage. She's since, I believe, suffered a seizure. She's reportedly experienced rapid weight loss, fainting episodes. She's held thousands of miles away from her family.
Let's make them notice.
Why are we not paying more attention to her case? Do you think she's going to get released anytime soon, from what you're hearing?
I believe that she must be released. I think now her story is being highlighted as you were bringing her story on. I would say that Leka has not yet or received a fair coverage from the media. Unfortunately, it took more than 10 months for her to get in an emergency situation, being chained to a stretcher or to the hospital bed and be hospitalized for the media to see her as a human being. This is a war on everything that is Palestinian, and anybody who dares to raise their voice and to challenge what this administration is doing, which is destroying the constitution of this country in service of a genocidal state, which is Israel.
Yes, indeed. Before you were arrested by ICE last year, you'd actually reached out to Colombia's administration, asking them